At Station 3, we examine environmental stressors in the workplace. So we have three main areas that we examine in the undergraduate lab, the first being lighting, second acoustical, and third thermal. So we thought we'd just give you a quick overview of the tools that you would be using if you were with us in the lab. First off, in terms of lighting, we have a foot candle or a lux meter. And so just a couple definitions to get you started. If we're looking at luminous or light flux, that's the energy that's given off by a source. And so the units for that are going to be in lumens. Secondly, a luminance is the amount of light that actually falls onto a surface. So the units for that is a lux, and 1 lux is approximately equal to 1 lumen square foot. 1 foot candle is about 10.7 lux. And so here on this X-Tech light meter or lux meter that we have, you'll notice that the overhead light source right now is at approximately 455 lux. And just something else that I wanted to point out on the scale here is, so we have lux here and we have foot candle here, and you'll notice the difference in the scale is approximately 10. That's relating back to the fact that 1 foot candle is approximately 10.76 lux. So for this light meter, if you were measuring in the Department of Kinesiology or in the HK building, lighting of approximately 300 to 500 would be appropriate in an office, so it's not surprising that our number right now in the undergraduate lab is falling within that. A couple of other areas that you might think of, if you were looking at like a low light restaurant, you would expect about 50 lux, whereas if someone was performing surgery, you would need about 25,000 lux, or on a really, really sunny day, it could be upwards of 100,000 lux. If you were using this in the undergraduate lab, you would just need to make sure that you are using the appropriate setting and that you are recording with the proper units. Secondly, we're going to look at the acoustical environment, so examining sound and noise, keeping in mind that sound is measured either in frequency or amplitude. Frequency being the number of pressure vibrations or fluctuations per second, and the unit is hertz, and it's perceived as pitch. Whereas amplitude is the loudness of something, and so that is going to be measured in decibels, which is what we're looking at right now. So as I'm talking, you can see if I raise my voice that the sound level meter is going to record this. A few other things to note. Noise, we know, is just any unwanted sound. We have a L equivalent, and so L EQ underscore EQ is the equivalent level of sustained noise, and it's usually going to measure the average noise level at L50 or the peak noise level at L1. As a couple of examples, a loud voice would be between 50 to 90 decibels, whereas a chainsaw would be 105 to 115 decibels, a jet would be 120, and a rifle shot would be 130 decibels. So just to reiterate, L equivalent refers to the equivalent level of sustained noise. L1 would be the peak noise level, and L50 would be the average noise level. For the thermal environment, we have a few tools that we're going to be using in the lab. First off, we have this relative humidity / temperature pen. And when we're looking at relative humidity, it's a hygrometer that's going to measure that. Low humidity being pretty low is about 20%, whereas high would be 70%. We could also look at dry bulb temperature, and that's going to examine ambient heat or non-radiant heat, and that's usually going to be measured with a shielded thermometer. Globe temperature measures radiant heat, and that's based on a thermometer that is in a black matte sphere, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. A wet bulb globe temperature looks at temperature, humidity, and air velocity, and it's an index of environmental heat stress. We also have a Humidex heat-based response plan that we are going to look at in addition to these few here. So first off, for the temperature pen, you can see that in this room, in the undergraduate lab right now, we are at approximately 60% humidity
It has been raining a lot in Windsor over the past couple of days, and so it's very, very humid outside, so I'm not surprised to see this. And the current temperature is just over 19 degrees Celsius. This tool is very easy because you basically just turn it on and it gives you that information. If you wanted, you could change the units to imperial units instead of metric, but for now we'll leave it here. Here we have a 3-in-1 pocket hygrothermo anemometer, and it's different from the other thermal tools because it also can measure air velocity. So right now we see that the relative humidity is measuring about 65, the temperature just slightly higher, a little closer to 20 Celsius. If we change the function on this, you can also get air velocity speed. And you can see that you got a bit of an air velocity speed. Our third thermal tool is the heat stress wet bulb globe temp meter. And so it's going to measure temperature, humidity, and radiant heat. It's an index of environmental heat stress that accounts for ambient air, that being the dry bulb, relative humidity being the wet bulb, and the radiant heat measured in the black matte radiant heat globe, or the sphere there. And so if you have low relative humidity, that is going to mean that you're taking the dry bulb temp minus the wet bulb temp, and the difference is high. High relative humidity would be the dry bulb temp minus the wet bulb temp, and the difference would be low, and it's just looking at the weighted average overall of the dry bulb temp, the wet bulb temp, and the globe temperature. So you can just toggle back and forth between all the measures, and it also has the relative humidity there as well, and obviously the temperature. Lastly, I just briefly want to describe the OCal Humidex heat response plan. So it's very simple. You just locate the temperature. So for example, if we have a temperature of 28 degrees Celsius, and if we have a relative humidity of 50 degrees, that is going to give us a score of 33. And then we look on the chart and we see that 33 would mean that we have to be alert for symptoms and to drink extra water, and that would be for moderate unacclimatized and heavy acclimatized. Whereas if we had 33 for people who were moderate acclimatized and light unacclimatized, then it would just be water as needed. But you can see that the severity would increase as you go up. So in order to get a score of 45 in this area, you would be at very, very low relative humidity with a very, very high temperature. So in this zone here, and in that case, only medically supervised work could be done. So in location 2, when I just started talking there, the sound meter obviously picked up more sound, and so higher decibel, but it was kind of centered around 40 decibels. The wet bulb globe temp is measuring at 16.3 degrees Celsius, ambient temperature is 19.2, and globe temp is 20.2. The relative humidity is 61.5%. In addition to that, we'll just let the light meter do its thing for a second. So relative humidity on the temperature pen and humidity pen is 62, approximately 62, and 19.9 Celsius. And we are measuring about 100 lux right now. In the 3-in-1, it's measuring 20.2 degrees Celsius. There's no air velocity at this point. Gonna think about that one for a second. Okay, 20.4 degrees Celsius, relative humidity of about 65.5%. Okay, our third location is in a restroom. And so as I started talking again, it was about 60 decibels for sound, but I'm gonna stop for a moment. back down to just over 40 there. For relative humidity, still sitting at 60%, 16.6 degrees Celsius. Ambient temperature is 19.7, and globe temp is 20.5, with the relative humidity of 60.5. 63% relative humidity and 21.1 degrees Celsius. And no wind speed here. The temperature pen, also very consistent with the other tools. And then the light meter. At just over 400 lux. Before I started talking, it was at about 44 for sound level meter. Relative humidity in this stairwell is about 62.5%. Wet bulb globe temp is 18.3. Ambient temperature 20.8. And globe temperature 23.8. It is much warmer in this stairwell than elsewhere in the building, just to give you an idea. The temperature pen is showing a relative humidity percent of closer to 60% with a temperature of 23.6. Still no air velocity. .1 degrees Celsius and just over 64% relative humidity. And then lastly, because we do have some sunshine here, you'll notice that it's showing a 1. If it shows a 1, you might have to change what level you are on, because here it's showing 1980 lux, 1990 lux, because we are somewhat facing the sun here. If it's showing a 1, you need to toggle to the next category, and then you might need to multiply it by the value that's located there. So by multiply it by the next category, it's showing that you would have to multiply it by 10, so therefore it'd be approximately 2,000 at this point, just over 2,000 lux. So before I began talking, the decibel level outside here is slightly higher. It was between like 55 and 60 decibels. The relative percent of humidity is about 78%. Wet bulb globe temp, just over 23 degrees Celsius. Ambient temperature, just about 24 degrees Celsius. Globe temperature, almost 29 degrees Celsius. And relative humidity at just over 77%. For the 3-in-1, the relative humidity is showing at about 80% right now. And the temperature was 24.5 degrees Celsius. Trying to get to air velocity here. It is spinning, but at a negligible amount of spin in this case. The humidity on the pen is just over 60%, and the temperature is about 28 degrees Celsius. And lastly, because we are outside, this is just over 20,000 lux. Location 6, about 34,000 lux. So the sound out here was about 62 with the construction before I started speaking. Relative humidity just over 61. Wet bulb globe temp at 26.4 Celsius. Ambient temp just over 29 degrees Celsius, and globe temp about 34 degrees Celsius. the pen is showing 53% humidity and 29 degrees Celsius. 3-in-1 is showing, it's actually recording a little bit of velocity there. Depending on which way I move, it's upwards of 1 meter per second. Oh, it just went a little higher than 1 meter per second. And 62% relative humidity and 29 degrees Celsius.